$27 million. In 1983, that could buy you a small island, a fleet of Ferraris, or apparently one catastrophic sci-fi fantasy movie that nobody wanted to see. But here's the thing. That wasn't even close to the decade's most expensive disaster. The 1980s was Hollywood's great budgetary experiment. Studios discovered they could spend ridiculous amounts of money. They just hadn't figured out if they should. And one of the films on this list didn't just flop. It almost killed a legendary director's career and made an entire studio question whether they understood their own audience. By the end, you'll know exactly why these 10 films burned through mountains of cash and crashed anyway. The patterns repeat, the lessons remain unlearned, and the money, it just kept disappearing. This is Cinema Bomb Squad. Krull, 1983. Let's start where the money started disappearing. Columbia Pictures greenlit a fantasy epic that promised to be Star Wars meets King Arthur meets something. They built sets in Italy and England that required their own infrastructure. They hired Derek Meddings, the special effects wizard behind James Bond's most impossible stunts. The glaive, that spinning blade weapon you might vaguely remember, took months to design and rig for the camera. The budget climbed to $27 million, massive for a fantasy film in 1983. The movie opens in theaters in July, right in the middle of Return of the Jedi's summer dominance, and Krull earns $16.9 million worldwide. Not domestic, worldwide. Critics couldn't figure out if it was trying to be science fiction or high fantasy. The Cyclops creature worked. The Widow of the Web worked. But the tone whipsawed between campy and earnest so fast audiences got motion sickness. Columbia marketed it as the next Star Wars. It played like a Renaissance fair that accidentally booked a laser light show. This flop proves that spectacle without genre clarity is just expensive confusion, and that was just the warm-up. The Black Cauldron, 1985, because the next disaster was brewing at Disney. Disney's most expensive animated film ever at the time. $44 million. Think about that. More expensive than any live-action fantasy Disney had attempted. The studio wanted to prove animation could be dark, mature, sophisticated. They wanted to compete with Don Bluth, who'd left Disney and was making darker animated films that were eating Disney's lunch, so they adapted Lloyd Alexander's Chronicles of Prydain. They hired Tim Burton briefly. They pushed the animation team to create sequences scarier than anything Disney had ever released. Then Jeffrey Katzenberg arrived at Disney, watched the film, and literally cut 12 minutes out of it with scissors because he thought it was too terrifying for children. The movie that released was caught between two audiences, too dark and slow for kids, too sanitized and incomplete for the older crowd Disney was chasing. It earned $21 million domestic. Disney didn't even report international numbers at the time because they were so dismal. The film that was supposed to revolutionize Disney animation nearly ended Disney animation. The lesson? You can't surgically remove a film's identity 2 months before release and expect audiences to embrace what's left. But nothing compared to what happened next. Revolution, 1985. Same year, Warner Brothers' Al Pacino. A Revolutionary War epic directed by Hugh Hudson, fresh off Chariots of Fire. The budget was $28 million, which doesn't sound insane until you realize this was a period piece requiring thousands of extras, authentic colonial costumes, and elaborate battle sequences filmed in England and Norway because they couldn't find the right American locations. Here's where it gets messy. Pacino allegedly didn't want to do the film, but was contractually obligated. The script wasn't finished when shooting began. Hudson kept rewriting scenes on set. Pacino's character was supposed to be an illiterate fur trapper, but Pacino couldn't shake his Bronx accent. So you've got this supposedly uneducated colonial American who sounds like he just walked out of Scarface. The production ran over schedule. The budget ballooned. Warner Brothers rushed it into theaters for Christmas 1985 to qualify for award season. Revolution earned less than $1 million domestically. Critics savaged it. Audiences stayed away in numbers so dramatic that theaters pulled it after 1 week. Pacino took a 4-year break from acting because of this film. Hugh Hudson's career never recovered. The movie that was supposed to be an Oscar contender became a punchline about what happens when nobody on set can agree on what movie they're making. This flop teaches us that no amount of talent or period detail can save a film that's being written during production, and we're just getting started. Howard the Duck, 1986. Because 1986 brought something even stranger. Yes, that Howard the Duck. George Lucas produced it through Lucasfilm. Universal distributed it. The budget was somewhere between 30 and 37 million, depending on which source you trust. This was supposed to be Lucasfilm's first big post-Star Wars franchise launcher, a talking duck from outer space who crash lands in Cleveland and fights the dark overlords of the universe. Lucas handed directing duties to Willard Huyck, who'd co-written American Graffiti and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. The problem started with the duck suit. They couldn't make it look good. The animatronics were cutting edge for 1986, but cutting edge wasn't good enough. Howard looks like a nightmare puppet that gained sentience. Then there's the tone. The film has a bizarre quasi-romantic subplot between Howard and Lee Thompson's character that makes audiences deeply uncomfortable. It's too adult and too suggestive for kids. It's too silly and too low stakes for adults. It's a movie that couldn't find its audience because it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Howard the Duck earned $16 million domestically against that $37 million budget. It became shorthand for expensive misfire. Lucas had to deal with both this bomb and the cost overruns on his Skywalker Ranch facility, which nearly bankrupted Lucasfilm and forced him to sell Pixar to Steve Jobs. One duck suit destroyed more than just a movie. It almost took down an empire. This flop proves that cutting-edge effects technology means nothing if your lead character makes people's skin crawl, and that's nothing compared to the next one. Ishtar, 1987. Because 1987 brought the movie everyone knows as a punchline even if they've never seen it. Columbia Pictures. Elaine May directing. Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman starring as the worst lounge singers in history who accidentally become involved in Middle Eastern political intrigue. The budget started at $27 million. It ended somewhere around $55 million. Reports vary wildly, but every source agrees on one thing. It was a disaster before it even wrapped. May was a perfectionist. She demanded take after take. The Morocco shoot went over schedule by weeks. She insisted on rewriting dialogue daily. Columbia's executives watched the budget climb and panicked. They started leaking negative stories to the press before the movie even released. By the time Ishtar hit theaters in May 1987, it had been pre-murdered by its own studio's PR sabotage and a media feeding frenzy about Hollywood excess. Ishtar earned around $14 million domestically. Critics destroyed it. Audiences avoided it because they'd been told for months it was a catastrophe. Here's the twist. If you watch Ishtar today, it's actually not terrible. It's a weird, slow-burn comedy with some legitimately funny moments, but it never had a chance. The perception became the reality. This flop teaches us that a studio can kill its own movie if it loses faith before release, and we're about to hit the big ones. Heaven's Gate, 1980. Michael Cimino directing his follow-up to The Deer Hunter, which won Best Picture. United Artists gave him carte blanche, final cut, creative control. A budget that started at $11 million and somehow, impossibly, ended somewhere between $40 and $44 million. For 1980, that was obscene money. Cimino shot millions of feet of film. He built an entire town in Montana. He demanded perfection in every shot, which meant reshooting scenes dozens of times. The production took months longer than scheduled. Cimino delivered a cut that was 5 hours and 25 minutes long. United Artists convinced him to trim it to 3 hours and 39 minutes for the premiere. Critics at that premiere annihilated it. The studio pulled it after 1 week, recut it down to 2 hours and 29 minutes, and re-released it. Nobody cared. Heaven's Gate earned around $3.8 million domestically against that $44 million budget. It didn't just flop. It destroyed United Artists as an independent entity. The studio was sold to MGM. An entire company collapsed because one director was given unlimited power and unlimited budget. Cimino's career never recovered. The film's failure changed how studios approached director-driven projects for the next decade. This flop proves that artistic vision without financial restraint is a suicide pact. But here's the question. Was Heaven's Gate actually the most expensive disaster of the decade? Not even close. The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, 1988. Terry Gilliam directing for Columbia Pictures. A fantasy epic based on the tall tales of the legendary Baron. The budget was approved at $23.5 million. It ended at around $46 million, though Gilliam disputes the exact figure. What's not disputed, this production was chaos incarnate. Gilliam shot in Rome at Cinecittà Studios. The Italian crew went on strike multiple times. Sets were built incorrectly and had to be demolished and rebuilt. The special effects were practical and elaborate, requiring massive mechanical rigs. Columbia's executives hated what they were seeing in dailies. They fought with Gilliam constantly. The studio changed leadership mid-production, and the new regime wanted nothing to do with this weird fantasy film they'd inherited. When Baron Munchausen finally limped into theaters in 1989, Columbia barely marketed it. They dumped it in limited release. It earned $8 million domestically. The film that was supposed to be Gilliam's masterpiece became another entry in his long history of troubled productions. Critics who saw it mostly loved it. Audiences couldn't find it in theaters. This flop teaches us that a film can be killed by studio politics and bad timing as easily as by bad creative. And we're in the home stretch now. Dune, 1984. David Lynch directing Frank Herbert's supposedly unfilmable science fiction epic for Dino De Laurentiis. The budget was around $40 to $42 million. For 1984, that put it among the most expensive films ever made. De Laurentiis and Universal wanted a franchise. They envisioned multiple Dune films. They built elaborate sets in Mexico. They hired some of the best effects artists in the world. They gave Lynch freedom to create his vision. Lynch delivered a cut that was 3 hours plus. Universal demanded he trim it to 2 hours and 17 minutes. The theatrical cut that resulted is incomprehensible if you haven't read the book. Characters narrate their internal thoughts in voiceover because there's no time to show their motivations. The world building is rushed. The political intrigue that makes the novel fascinating gets reduced to exposition dumps. Lynch himself has disowned this version. Dune earned around $30 million domestically against that $42 million budget. Factor in international, and it likely broke even or took a small loss. But it was considered a massive disappointment. The franchise died. The sequels never happened. Lynch's reputation as a weird but bankable director took a hit. He went back to making smaller, stranger films and didn't touch big-budget studio work for years. This flop proves that trying to cram an epic novel into 2 hours to satisfy studio concerns satisfies nobody, and you'd think that would be the biggest lesson. But we haven't hit number 1 yet. Santa Claus, the movie, 1985. Yes, a Santa Claus movie. The Salkinds, the producers behind Superman, decided to do for Santa what they did for the Man of Steel. They envisioned a massive holiday franchise. The budget climbed to around $50 million in 1985 for a Christmas movie. They built elaborate sets at Pinewood Studios. They hired Academy Award-winning cinematographer Arthur Ibbotson. They cast Dudley Moore as an elf and John Lithgow as a villain. The first half of the film tells Santa's origin story. The second half is about a corrupt toy manufacturer trying to replace Santa. The tone is all over the place. It's too slow and earnest for kids. It's too silly for adults. The special effects, showing Santa's sleigh flying, look dated even for 1985. And critically, it released opposite young Sherlock Holmes and was buried by holiday competition. Santa Claus. The movie earned around $23 million domestically against that $50 million budget. The Salkinds' dream of a Santa cinematic universe died instantly. This flop teaches us that spectacle can't save a movie that can't decide who its audience is. But there's one more, and it's the one that started this whole conversation. Raise the Titanic, 1980. Lou Grade producing. Based on the Clive Cussler novel about recovering the Titanic from the ocean floor before the Cold War Soviets can get to it. The budget started at $20 million. It ended at around $36 million in 1980 dollars. Adjusted for inflation, that's catastrophic money for an action-adventure film. The production built massive scale models of the Titanic. They constructed huge water tanks in Malta for the ocean sequences. The underwater sequences required specialized equipment and crews. Everything that could go wrong did. The script went through multiple rewrites. The special effects looked impressive for the time but couldn't overcome the film's fundamental problem. Nobody cared about the plot. Raise the Titanic premiered in the summer of 1980. It earned around $7 million domestically. That's it. Producer Lou Grade famously joked that it would have been cheaper to lower the Atlantic. The film nearly bankrupted Grade's production company. It killed the Dirk Pitt franchise before it started. It proved that throwing money at spectacle without a compelling human story is just burning cash in slow motion. This flop teaches us the oldest lesson Hollywood keeps forgetting. Audiences need characters they care about, not just expensive set pieces. And when you look at all 10 of these disasters together, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Here's what connects them. Every single one of these films prioritized scale over story. Everyone believed that spending more money would somehow solve creative problems. Everyone either had production chaos that ballooned costs or studio interference that killed whatever vision the filmmakers had. And everyone mistimed its release, either competing against box office juggernauts or launching into a market that didn't want what they were selling. The 1980s taught Hollywood that bigger isn't always better, but Hollywood didn't learn the lesson. These flops paved the way for the even more expensive disasters of the 90s and 2000s. Waterworld, Cutthroat Island, John Carter. The pattern repeats because the incentive structure never changes. Studios chase spectacle, filmmakers chase vision, budgets chase both. And audiences, when they're not interested, don't show up just because you spent $100 million. So, if you want to see the most expensive flops of the 1990s and how the budgets got even more insane, drop a comment. And next, you should watch our breakdown of the most expensive movies that actually made their money back, because the difference between success and failure is often one or two creative decisions. The money always disappears. The question is whether anyone learned where it went.